So yesterday where we left off, we had this code that detects a key press and then transform, translate vector to right. But it only does it when we press the key code down and then it moves to the right. It's kind of ugly, and I mean we could extrapolate that and do one for up, left, and down. However, it's not smooth enough. It's not detecting all those subtle variations between 0 and 1. It's like it's either on or it's off, which is why it's jumping. As you recall, under Edit, Project Settings, Input, there are different axes, and on the horizontal axes, we have sensitivity. Basically, when you go from 0 to 1, there are different values. So just to show that in your script, I'm going to, in my debug log where it says D was pressed, what if we just put in the value of our input horizontal? So if we do debug log and we want it to show us in the console what the value of our input is on the horizontal axis, we can do an input.getAxis and then horizontal. And the results of that, when we play with the console window open, we click in there. Every time I hit the D, and if I hold D, nothing happens because it's only getting my single key press. And you'll notice it's all these values like 0.04, 05, 05 with a bunch of decimal or a bunch of numbers after that. So it's lurching to the right according to that, right? Not exactly what we want. We want it to be getting that input all the time. So to do that, I'm going to leave that debug log alone, except I'm going to, actually, you know what, I'm going to comment out this entire if statement using a control KC. And then above that, I'm going to use something that I am borrowing from a different script altogether. Every frame we want the game to know if we're moving, if we're pressing the left and right keys, right? So not just on key press, it should know if we're pressing the button every frame, right? And so every frame we're going to have it set a variable. And we want it to be a float. And we're going to call this move horizontal, using camel case, which means the first letter is lowercase and all the words after it are capitalized. And then we're going to set it equal to something. So remember, when we're dealing with variables, whatever is on the right side is being stored in here as though it's like a box. That's what the equal sign does. So every frame, it's going to take what's over here and store it in there. Well, what information do we want stored in there? We want to know, are they pressing a button on the horizontal axis? Which, remember, those buttons are under Project Settings, Input. The name is horizontal of the axis, so it's going to detect, are we pressing left, right, A, or D? Right? So, whoops. Not what I wanted. We want it to be equal to the input get axis, and then in quotes, horizontal. Close your quotes, close your parens, semicolon. So if I want to see what this variable is getting out of this, watch this. I'm going to copy move horizontal, and every frame I'm going to have it debug log that variable. all this will do is show me in the console the value of this variable. So let's debug log move horizontal. Clear that, play it. So right now it says 0 and it's logging lots of zeros. And now I'm going to hit the D. Interesting. Let me pause. You'll notice as I press the D key, this value went 0.05, 0.10, 0.15, 0.20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 1. And then I held the 1 key, and you can see for 101 frames I held the 1, or I held the D key at its maximum value. And when I let go, what happened to the value of the input? It started speeding down towards 0. So how is that different than what we had before? We have a lot more values. Before, all we had was 0.05 and that was it. Right? It never did anything else. So, we're on a roll. Let us now do the same thing for our vertical. So move float, move vertical. We're going to make a variable every frame, and that's going to be equal to the axis of vertical. Now we have two variables, move horizontal and move vertical, and they are gathering information when we hit the A and D's and the S and W's. And now we want to store the horizontal and the vertical as one variable. What type of variable can store the left and rights and the up and downs in one variable? Do you recall? They're called vectors. There's vector 3, which would be all three, the x, y, and z. That'd be a vector 3. Do we need the z? No, we just need the left and right, which is the x, and the up and down, which is the y. So it's called a vector 2. So in here, we need every frame for that variable to be updated with the values of our horizontal and vertical, right? So we're going to do a variable of type vector 2, and we're just going to call it movement. And we're going to set that equal to, so this is the type of variable, this is the name of the variable, and we want to equal to a new vector 2 made up of two things. What are our two variables that hold our two vectors? Move horizontal and move vertical. So move horizontal. Once it starts filling it in, you can hit the tab key, comma, move vertical. You'll notice the vector 2 is looking for a float for the x and a float for the y. Remember, we stored those values as floats? That's why, so we could plug them in here. You following? So get the input horizontal, get the input vertical, and store them as floats, which means they're numbers with decimals. And store them in one variable called movement. Now, every frame, it's storing the information, but it's not moving us at all. Right? So remember how we moved before? This transform.translate? That actually works. We just didn't give it the right information. So we are actually going to use that transform.translate capital translate. And now you'll notice in the little drop down it says, well, you could do that with a vector 3 translation. Vector 3, vector 3, vector 3. Or you could give it a XYZ space relative to blah, 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 blah. But you can also do it as just a vector 2 because we're working in 2D. So our vector is, what's our vector 2? Movement. Now, to be able to control how fast it's going, we have a speed. So we're going to multiply by that variable called speed, which would move us at a constant, not a constant, it would move us at a speed dependent on your frame rate. So if you're playing on a really junky computer, it'll move slow, but if you're playing on a fast computer, it'll move really fast. So if we want to control how fast it moves per second, we need to multiply by a fancy variable called time.delta time. Looks like that. Now we have all the inputs, stored them as a vector 2, and then we're telling it, hey, your transform, we want you to move the transform in the direction of distance, right? So movement, which gives it direction, and then speed, which gives it speed. So we save it, we go back here, we play it. Hey, look at that. We can move using our up, down, left, right. I can use my arrow keys, the WASD, doesn't matter. And it's logging my horizontals anyways. And in play mode, you can adjust this speed if it's going too fast. So let's try 5. It's a little slow for me. How about 9? I'll go with that for now. And remember, any adjustments you make in play mode, go back. So I'm going to set that to 9 here, save. Good, we've got movement.